At my granddaughter's wedding reception, my daughter-in-law made sure every guest knew exactly what she thought I was worth. Not grandmother of the bride. Not family. Just 2 words printed in black ink on a cream place card. Paid guest. I remember standing at the check-in table in the lobby of the Charleston Harbor Hotel, holding that little card between my fingers while the young hostess smiled at me like nothing was wrong. The ballroom doors were open behind her, spilling out warm golden light, soft piano music, and the smell of roses and roasted chicken. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked perfect. I had spent weeks imagining this evening. My granddaughter Grace walking through a room filled with people who loved her. My son Michael standing proud in his Navy suit. My daughter-in-law Vanessa finally setting aside years of cold smiles and polite distance because surely, on a wedding day, even difficult families remembered how to behave. I was 68 years old enough to know better than to expect miracles, but still foolish enough to hope for kindness. That morning, I had taken my time getting ready. I wore the champagne-colored dress Robert loved before he passed, the one he said made me look like I belonged under candlelight. I fastened the pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary and brushed my silver hair until it sat neatly at my shoulders. Before leaving my house, I stood in front of the hallway mirror and whispered, "For Grace." Not for Vanessa, not for Michael, for Grace, the little girl I once rocked to sleep when her parents were too tired to stand, the child whose college fund I had quietly helped build, the young woman whose wedding flowers I had paid for after Vanessa called me crying about the budget. I did not come to be praised. I came to watch my granddaughter begin her life. But when I looked down at that place card, something inside me went very still. Paid guest. The words were not typed crookedly. They were centered, deliberate, printed in the same elegant script as everyone else's name. I glanced at the cards stacked beside mine. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton, Aunt Claire, Reverend Thomas, grandmother of the groom. Everyone had a title. Everyone had a place. I had a receipt disguised as a name. The hostess noticed my expression and leaned forward. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" For a second, I almost handed it back. I almost said there had been a mistake. But then I saw Vanessa across the lobby, standing near the floral arch in her pale blue mother of the bride gown, one hand resting lightly on Michael's arm. She was watching me, not with surprise, not with embarrassment, with satisfaction. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile a person wears when a trap closes exactly the way she planned. Michael was beside her, looking anywhere but at me. That hurt more than the card. A stranger can insult you and leave only a bruise. Your own child can stand silent and make it feel like a verdict. I slipped the card into my hand, pressed my thumb over the words, and walked toward them slowly. Every step across that marble floor seemed louder than it should have been. Vanessa opened her arms as though welcoming a dear relative. "Eleanor, you made it," she said, sweet enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You look lovely." I held up the card. "Is this mine?" Her eyes flicked to it, then back to my face. "Oh," she said with a soft laugh. "That. Please don't be sensitive. It was just a little inside joke." Michael shifted his weight. He still would not meet my eyes. "Mom, today is about Grace," he murmured. "Let's not make a scene." I looked at my son, this 42-year-old man whose first shoes I still kept in a cedar box, and I wondered when he had learned to confuse his mother's dignity with a scene. I could have cried then. I could have raised my voice. I could have reminded them that the deposit on this reception, the flowers lining the aisle, the photographer moving between guests with 2 cameras around his neck, all of it had passed through my checking account in quiet transfers Vanessa had accepted without hesitation. But I did none of that. I smiled. Not warmly. Not weakly. Just enough. Then I reached for the small pin attached to the escort envelope, fixed that place card to the front of my dress like a name tag, and smoothed the fabric beneath it. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time. "Eleanor, you don't have to wear it." "Of course I do," I said. "If this is how I was invited, I should be properly introduced." Then I turned and walked into the reception with paid guest pinned over my heart, because sometimes humiliation is evidence, and I wanted every person in that room to see it. The ballroom had been transformed into the kind of room Grace used to cut out of bridal magazines when she was 13 years old. Tall glass vases stood on every table, filled with white roses, eucalyptus, and sprays of baby's breath. Gold-rimmed plates sat beneath folded linen napkins. Tiny votive candles flickered beside menu cards printed on thick ivory paper. Through the tall windows, the Charleston harbor glowed under the last orange light of evening, and for one brief moment, I almost let myself enjoy it. I almost forgot the card pinned to my dress. Then two women near the champagne table glanced at my chest, looked quickly at each other, and stopped talking. That was how the evening began to change, not with a shout, but with small silences opening around me like cracks in polished glass. I walked deeper into the room, keeping my shoulders straight, the way Robert had always taught me to do whenever people mistook kindness for weakness. A server offered me a glass of sparkling cider, and I accepted it just to give my hands something steady to hold. Across the ballroom, Grace stood near the sweetheart table in her lace gown, laughing softly as her new husband adjusted her veil for a photograph. She looked beautiful, innocent in the way brides sometimes look before they understand how many quiet bargains adults make around them. I wanted to go to her. I wanted to kiss her cheek and tell her that I remembered the first time she tried on a plastic tiara in my living room and announced she would marry someone who let her have 2 desserts. But Vanessa intercepted me before I could take 5 steps. She moved smoothly, smiling at guests as she crossed the room, her hand closing around my elbow with just enough pressure to look affectionate and feel like a warning. "Eleanor," she said under her breath, "please take that off. People are noticing." I looked down at the card. That was the point of printing it, was it not? Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes hardened. "It was a joke. You are making it uncomfortable." "No," I said quietly. "You made it accurate. I am simply wearing the accuracy." Her fingers released my arm. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw the woman who had called me 3 months earlier in a trembling voice, saying the florist needed another $8,000 or Grace would be humiliated. I had written the check that afternoon. No lecture. No conditions. Just love. Now that same woman stood in front of me acting as though my presence was the embarrassment, not her cruelty. "Your table is over there," Vanessa said, pointing toward the far corner near the kitchen doors. I followed her gesture and saw table 14, tucked behind a pillar, close enough to hear the swing of service doors and the clatter of dishes. At the head table, there were seats for Michael, Vanessa, Grace, the groom's parents, and even Vanessa's sister from Atlanta, who had met Grace perhaps 5 times in her life. There was no chair for me. My name, or what they had used in place of it, belonged by the kitchen. I felt the old familiar ache bloom in my chest, the one that had started after Robert died and Michael began answering his wife's glances faster than his mother's voice. "I see," I said. Vanessa tilted her head. "It is just seating, Eleanor. Do not turn it into something symbolic." But it was symbolic. Every inch of that room had been planned. Every flower had been chosen. Every chair had been assigned. People only call something meaningless when they do not want to be held responsible for what it means. I walked to table 14 and sat down between a retired co-worker of the groom's father and a cousin from Ohio, who introduced himself twice because he had no idea who I was. I placed my small evening purse on my lap, took 1 sip of cider, and watched my family from across the room like they were living behind glass. Michael laughed at something Vanessa whispered. Grace posed for another photograph. Guests leaned together, their eyes drifting toward my pinned card. Then away. I did not lower my gaze. I let them look. I had spent too many years smoothing over Vanessa's sharp edges so no one else would cut themselves. That night, I decided I would not bleed quietly anymore. The first course had barely been served when I began to understand how carefully Vanessa had arranged the evening. It was not only the card. It was not only the table by the kitchen doors. It was the way people approached me with smiles that already carried rumors inside them. A woman in a silver shawl leaned over my chair and said, "You must be very proud to have helped so much." The words were polite, but her eyes dropped to the card on my dress before she walked away. A man I recognized from Michael's office shook my hand and chuckled softly. "Well, at least they gave you credit, right?" I smiled because I had learned long ago that public embarrassment becomes worse when you give cruel people the reaction they came to collect. Across the room, Vanessa moved from table to table like a hostess in a magazine, touching shoulders, laughing lightly, making sure every guest felt included. Everyone except me. I watched her pause near the bar with 2 of her friends, women I had seen at Grace's bridal shower but had never been properly introduced to. One of them glanced toward me and covered her mouth with her napkin. Vanessa did not look ashamed. She looked entertained. The cousin from Ohio beside me was talking about his drive down Interstate 77, but his words faded as I heard a sharper voice behind the pillar. "That is Michael's mother," someone whispered. Vanessa said she insisted on paying for half the wedding so everyone would know she was important. Another woman answered, "Paid guest is kind of perfect, honestly." A soft laugh followed. Not loud. Not enough for the whole room to hear. Just enough for me. I set my fork down beside the salad I had not touched. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Inside, memories began arranging themselves in a pattern I could no longer ignore. The Christmas dinner Vanessa moved from my house to hers because she said it would be easier for Grace, then forgot to tell me the time had changed. The Mother's Day brunch, where my seat was placed at the end of a long patio table beside a cooler, while Vanessa's mother sat beside Michael. The summer barbecue when she introduced me to neighbors as Michael's mom from the old side of the family, as if I were a branch they had pruned and left on the curb. Each moment had seemed small by itself. A misunderstanding, a busy day, a careless phrase. That is how people like Vanessa work. They do not push you out all at once. They move your chair 1 inch at a time until one day you are sitting by the kitchen door at your own granddaughter's wedding, wearing an insult in script font. I opened my evening purse and took out my phone. I did not make a show of it. I simply rested it in my lap, angled the camera downward, and took a clear photograph of the place card pinned to my dress. Then I photographed the seating chart, visible on the easel near the entrance, where every family member had a name except me. Paid guest, table 14. I scrolled through my messages next. Vanessa's texts were still there, preserved in the plain honesty of blue and gray bubbles. "Eleanor, the deposit is due by Friday, and we would hate for Grace to lose the venue. Eleanor, the photographer raised his rate, and Michael is already so stressed. Eleanor, please do not mention the money to Grace. We do not want her feeling guilty." Message after message, each one wrapped in concern, each one ending with the same invisible hand held out. I had answered all of them with trust. "Of course, sweetheart. Send me the invoice. Do not worry, Grace. I am happy to help." Reading those words at table 14 felt like looking at another woman, someone softer, someone still trying to buy peace without admitting that peace should not have a price. When I looked up, Michael was watching me from across the room. For a heartbeat, I thought he might come over. I thought maybe the sight of his mother alone, pinned with those words, would reach whatever part of him still remembered the woman who packed his school lunches, waded through his little league games, and sat beside his hospital bed when he had pneumonia at 9 years old. He took one step in my direction. Vanessa touched his sleeve. He stopped. Then he turned back toward the head table. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not broke. Settled. Like a door closing softly in an empty house. I placed my phone back into my purse, folded my napkin across my untouched plate, and looked around the beautiful room Robert would have wanted me to enjoy. The candles glowed. The roses opened. The music played. And I understood at last that I had not been invited as family. I had been invited as proof of payment. Fine, I thought. If they wanted proof, I would make sure the right people saw all of it. The longer I sat at table 14, the clearer the past became. It was strange how humiliation could sharpen memory. For years, I had treated Vanessa's behavior like scattered raindrops, unpleasant but harmless if I kept moving. That night, under the soft lights of my granddaughter's reception, I finally saw the storm she had been building around me. I remembered the first Thanksgiving after Robert passed, when I arrived at Michael's house carrying 2 pumpkin pies and the green bean casserole Grace used to request every year. Vanessa met me at the door with her bright hostess smile and said, "Oh, Eleanor, I wish you had called first. We are keeping it very small this year." Behind her, I could hear laughter, silverware, football on the television, and Grace calling someone into the dining room. I stood on the porch in my wool coat, holding warm dishes in both hands, while Vanessa explained that Michael had been too overwhelmed to manage a big family gathering. Later that evening, Grace posted a photograph online of 20 people around the table. Vanessa's mother sat beside Michael. My casserole was on the buffet. I was not. I told myself it was grief. I told myself Michael was still adjusting to losing his father. I told myself mothers forgive because that is what keeps families from cracking open. Then there was Grace's college graduation in Virginia. I had bought my plane ticket 3 months early and booked a hotel 2 miles from campus. The week before the ceremony, Vanessa called and said each graduate only received 4 tickets, and they had gone to her side of the family because they had never seen Grace walk across a stage. I said I understood, even though I had watched Grace take her first steps across my kitchen floor. The morning of graduation, Michael sent me one blurry photograph and a short message. "Wish you could have been here, Mom." In the background of that photograph, tucked behind Vanessa's shoulder, I saw an empty chair. I did not mention it. I stared at that empty chair for a long time and then folded the dress I had planned to wear back into my closet. Memory after memory came forward now, each one carrying the same quiet signature. A changed time, a missing invitation, a joke about my age, a warning not to bring up money because it would make people uncomfortable. Vanessa had never needed to ban me from the family. She simply made my presence inconvenient, then acted wounded whenever I noticed. And Michael, my only child, kept choosing the easier silence. A server reached across me to remove my untouched plate. "Are you finished, ma'am?" he asked gently. I looked down and realized the salad leaves were still neat, the fork resting exactly where I had placed it. "Yes," I said. "I am finished." But I was not talking about dinner. Across the room, Grace and her new husband began their first dance. The guests gathered around the dance floor, phones raised, faces softened by candlelight and music. For a moment, my anger loosened. Grace looked radiant, her smile trembling with the sweetness of a young woman who believed love would always protect her. I hoped it would. I hoped the man holding her hands would have more courage than her father. I hoped she would never learn how cold a family room could feel when everyone saw you being pushed aside and decided comfort mattered more than truth. I stood quietly and moved closer to the edge of the crowd, not wanting to miss her dance. Vanessa noticed me at once. She left Michael's side and came toward me, still smiling for the guests, her voice low enough to stay private. "Eleanor, people are asking questions," she said. "Then answer them honestly." Her jaw tightened. "You are embarrassing Grace." I looked past her to my granddaughter, spinning slowly under the chandelier. "No, Vanessa, I am watching Grace. You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "That is the problem." For the first time, she seemed unsure of what I might do. Her eyes moved to my purse, then back to the card on my dress. She knew I had taken photographs. She knew there were invoices, messages, transfers. She knew the truth had a paper trail. But she also knew I had spent years avoiding conflict, and she was counting on the old version of me to return before dessert. I almost felt sorry for how badly she had miscalculated. The song ended, and applause filled the room. I clapped for Grace with everyone else. Then, near the bar, I saw a familiar silver-haired man in a dark suit staring directly at the card pinned to my chest. Arthur Bennett, Robert's oldest friend and the attorney who had handled our family trust, stepped away from a group of guests. His expression changed from confusion to quiet anger as he walked toward me. Vanessa saw him too. Her face lost a little color. Arthur stopped beside me and said softly, "Eleanor, tell me that does not say what I think it says." I touched the edge of the card with 2 fingers. It says exactly what they wanted it to say. Arthur Bennett had known my husband for 46 years. They met as young men in a small accounting office in Columbia, long before either of them owned a decent suit or understood how heavy family responsibilities could become. Robert trusted very few people with the private parts of his life, but Arthur had been one of them. He knew where every document was kept, which accounts were meant for household expenses, which investments were for Grace's future, and which parts of Robert's estate were protected so that I would never have to ask anyone for permission to live with dignity. Seeing him in that ballroom felt like seeing a piece of Robert walk back into the room. Vanessa must have felt it too, because she stepped closer before Arthur could say more. "Arthur," she said with a polished little laugh, "please do not misunderstand. It was a harmless joke. Eleanor has always had a wonderful sense of humor." Arthur did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me, steady and kind in a way that almost made my throat close. "Eleanor," he said, "was this your idea?" I shook my head once. No, that single word seemed to settle the matter for him. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The softness left his face. Vanessa folded her hands in front of her dress. "This is a wedding. I really hope we are not going to make Grace's evening uncomfortable over a seating card." I looked at Arthur then and gave a small, tired smile. Apparently, I paid enough to be invited, but not enough to be respected. Arthur glanced toward table 14, toward the kitchen doors still swinging open and closed behind my empty chair. Then he looked at the head table, where Michael was pretending not to watch us. "Where were you seated?" he asked. "By the service entrance." "And Grace knows." I do not think Grace knows much of anything tonight. That was the truth. My granddaughter was still glowing on the dance floor, being pulled from one photograph to another, surrounded by voices telling her this was the happiest night of her life. I would not be the one to stain that happiness unless there was no other choice. Vanessa leaned in, her voice thin now. "Eleanor, you are being unfair. You offered to help. No one forced you." I turned to her slowly. "No one forced me to help. That is true. But no one warned me that help would be turned into a costume." Arthur's jaw tightened. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed his reading glasses, the way he always did before discussing business. "Vanessa, I would be careful with the word offered. I have reviewed several of the transfers related to this wedding. Some were reimbursements for invoices sent directly to Eleanor. Some were described as emergency family support. That is not the same as a casual gift." Vanessa's face changed just enough for me to see fear pass beneath the makeup. "That is private financial information." "It is Eleanor's financial information," Arthur said evenly. "And Robert asked me to make sure she understood the difference between generosity and exploitation." The music shifted to something softer. Around us, guests were returning to their seats, but a few had noticed the stillness in our corner. Michael finally crossed the room, his smile strained. "Arthur, good to see you." "Mom, can we talk about this later?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Later is where you have put me for 5 years, Michael." He flinched, but not enough to step fully to my side. Vanessa touched his arm again, that small familiar command. Arthur noticed it too. "Michael," he said, "your father loved you. But he also worried that after he was gone, your mother would be treated like a resource instead of a person." Michael's face reddened. "That is not what is happening." I raised the edge of the card with 2 fingers. "Then what would you call this?" He had no answer. For the first time all evening, silence worked for me instead of against me. Arthur lowered his voice, so only the 3 of us could hear. "Eleanor, there is a provision in the Caldwell family trust that Robert insisted on adding before he passed. I did not expect it to become relevant tonight." Vanessa went very still. Michael looked confused. I remembered Robert sitting at our kitchen table after his diagnosis, papers spread beside his coffee cup, saying only that he wanted to make sure I would never be pressured by anyone, even family. I had told him Michael would never do that. Robert had looked at me with sadness, not agreement. Arthur continued, "Any substantial support connected to Michael and Vanessa can be reviewed if there is documented mistreatment, coercion, or public humiliation directed at you." The words landed quietly, but they changed the air around us. Vanessa's eyes dropped to my phone inside my open purse. She understood. The card, the seating chart, the messages, the invoices, the witnesses. All her little jokes had become records. I looked toward Grace, laughing as her husband whispered something in her ear, and I made my decision. "Not during dinner," I said softly. "Not while she is smiling like that." Vanessa exhaled as if she had won. She had not. I turned to Arthur. "When the speeches begin, I want the truth simple, clean, and impossible to twist." Arthur nodded once. "Then we will wait for the speeches." Dinner resumed as if nothing had happened, but the room no longer felt beautiful to me. The candles still glowed, the flowers still opened toward the light, and servers still moved between tables with practiced smiles. But beneath all of it, I could feel tension gathering like humidity before a summer storm. Vanessa returned to the head table with her chin lifted, pretending confidence. Yet every few minutes her eyes found Arthur, then me, then the purse resting beside my chair. Michael sat beside her, pale and restless, touching his water glass, folding and unfolding his napkin, looking like a boy who had broken a window and was waiting for someone else to confess. I stayed at table 14 until the plates were cleared. I ate 3 bites of chicken, not because I was hungry, but because I refused to look wounded for anyone's entertainment. The older gentleman beside me asked whether I was from Charleston, and I told him I had lived 40 minutes outside the city for almost 30 years. He smiled kindly and said the harbor looked lovely at night. I agreed. It was easier to speak about water than betrayal. When dessert plates were set out, the band lowered the music and the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to begin our toasts." A soft cheer moved through the ballroom. Glasses were raised. Chairs turned toward the head table. Grace leaned against her husband's shoulder, her face flushed with happiness, unaware that the adults around her had built a stage out of lies. The groom's father spoke first, warm and brief. He told a harmless story about his son learning to tie a necktie and welcomed Grace into their family. People laughed. People clapped. Then Vanessa rose, smoothing the front of her dress as though preparing for a photograph. She took the microphone with both hands and waited until the room quieted. When Grace was a little girl, she began, her voice soft and shining. She dreamed of a day exactly like this. Around the room, people smiled. Even I felt a tug of tenderness, because that part was true. Grace had dreamed of candlelight and flowers and a husband who looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Vanessa continued, speaking about motherhood, sacrifice, planning, late nights, and all the work she and Michael had done to give their daughter the celebration she deserved. She thanked the florist by name. She thanked the wedding planner. She thanked the groom's parents for raising a wonderful young man. She thanked her own sister for flying in early to help with welcome bags. She thanked Michael for being the most generous father a daughter could ask for. My name did not appear. Not once. Not even as a mistake. I watched Michael lower his eyes. He knew. Arthur stood near the side wall, his arms folded, listening with the stillness of a man counting every omission. Vanessa lifted her glass and smiled toward Grace. This wedding is proof of what family can create when everyone gives from the heart and asks for nothing in return. The room applauded. That sentence stayed in the air longer than the others. Asks for nothing in return. I looked down at the card on my dress and almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because cruelty often dresses itself in the language of gratitude. Vanessa turned to hand the microphone back, but the master of ceremonies asked, would any other family members like to say a few words before we move to cake? There was a pause, the kind of pause people expect to pass without consequence. I placed my napkin on the table, picked up my small purse, and stood. The cousin from Ohio blinked at me. A few guests turned. Vanessa saw me and froze with her hand still near the microphone. Michael mouthed something I could not hear. I walked slowly, not toward Vanessa, but toward Grace. Every step felt measured. I was not angry in the way people expect anger to look. My voice was not raised. My hands did not shake. I thought of Robert at our kitchen table, saying, never beg people to honor you. Let the truth do it. When I reached the front, Vanessa tried to smile. Eleanor, maybe later. I held out my hand for the microphone. Now we'll be fine. She hesitated just long enough for people to notice. Then she gave it to me. The room settled into silence. I looked first at Grace. Sweetheart, you are beautiful tonight, I said. Her eyes softened. And I want you to know that. Nothing I say is meant to take away from the vows you made or the life you are beginning. Vanessa shifted beside me. Michael whispered, Mom, please. I did not look at him. I touched the place card pinned over my heart and turned slightly so the room could see it clearly. I was given this when I arrived tonight, I said. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was a message. A ripple moved through the tables. Someone murmured the words aloud. Paid guest. Grace's smile disappeared. Vanessa reached for the microphone, but Arthur stepped forward from the wall, calm and visible. She stopped. I kept my eyes on my granddaughter. I did not come here to be thanked for money. I came because I love you. But there is a difference between not needing credit and accepting humiliation. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the harbor wind press faintly against the windows. I let the silence stay for a moment because silence can do what shouting never does. It makes people listen to themselves. Around the ballroom, eyes moved from my face to the card on my dress, then to Vanessa, then to Michael. I could see questions forming at every table. Not loud questions. Worse ones. Private ones. The kind that stay after the music starts again. I reached into my purse and removed the folded escort envelope that had held my card. My fingers were steady. Grace, I said gently, you were told this wedding came together because your parents worked hard and sacrificed. I do not doubt they worked. Planning a wedding is never easy. But there are parts of this evening you deserve to understand, because someday, when you build your own home, I hope you will know the difference between love and performance. Grace stared at me with tears gathering along her lower lashes. Her new husband took her hand. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice tight, but still dressed in sweetness. Eleanor, this is not appropriate. I turned to her. Neither was this. I touched the card again, and a faint murmur moved through the room. I did not list every dollar. I did not need to. A person does not have to empty her private bank statements in public to prove she has been used. I spoke simply. When the venue deposit was due in February, I paid it after Vanessa told me Grace might lose the room. When the florist needed more money in March, I paid that too. When the photographer, the string quartet, and the final catering balance became urgent, I was asked to help quietly, so Grace would not worry. I agreed because I love my granddaughter. I agreed because I believed family did not need applause for doing what love requires. Michael closed his eyes. That was the first honest thing he had done all night. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her makeup, but she recovered enough to whisper, "You offered." I nodded. Yes, I offered help. I did not offer my dignity. That line seemed to land everywhere at once. A woman near the front covered her mouth. The groom's mother looked at Vanessa with open disbelief. The wedding planner, standing near the side doors with a headset, stared at the floor as though she wished she could disappear into it. Arthur Bennett moved closer, not taking the microphone, simply standing where everyone could see that I was not alone. I continued, softer now. I was seated at table 14, near the kitchen doors, while people who barely know my granddaughter were placed with family. I heard strangers repeat a story that I wanted attention, that I insisted on paying so people would notice me. I want to be very clear. I did not ask to be noticed. I asked, silently and foolishly, to still be treated as Grace's grandmother. Grace began to cry then, not loudly, but with a hurt that broke my heart more than Vanessa's insult ever could. "Grandma," she whispered, and that one word almost made me stop. Almost. But stopping would have protected the wrong people. Vanessa reached for Michael's arm, but this time he did not look at her. He looked at me. Shame was written across his face, and I knew he was remembering the invoices, the calls, the moments when he had allowed his wife to turn my generosity into something shameful because it was easier than correcting her. "Mom," he said, his voice rough. I did not know about the card. I believed him. That was the sad part. I believed he had not known the exact words. But I also knew he had. Known enough. He had seen where I was seated. He had seen me standing alone. He had seen Vanessa steer me away from Grace. Sometimes not knowing is only another name for not wanting to look. "Michael," I said, "you may not have printed it, but you stood beside the woman who did and asked me not to make a scene." He lowered his head. Vanessa's control slipped. "This is unbelievable," she said louder now. "You are punishing us on our daughter's wedding day because of a joke." Arthur finally spoke, his voice calm enough to cut through hers without force. "Vanessa, I would advise you not to call documented public humiliation a joke." The room shifted again. Documented. That word changed curiosity into understanding. Vanessa looked at him, then at my purse, then at the card. She understood that the evening had left evidence in more places than she could erase. I turned back to Grace. "Sweetheart, I am sorry this truth reached you tonight. I tried to wait for a kinder time, but people who hide behind special occasions count on decent people staying quiet. I will not do that anymore." I removed the card from my dress, held it in my palm, and placed it on the edge of the head table. "This belongs to the people who made it," I said. "It never belonged to me." The card lay on the edge of the head table like a small accusation. No one reached for it. Not Vanessa, not Michael, not even the wedding planner who had been trained to remove every awkward object from view before guests could notice. It stayed there under the chandelier light, cream paper, black ink, 2 words heavy enough to change the whole room. Arthur stepped beside me, not in front of me. That mattered. He was not rescuing me. He was standing witness while I rescued myself. "For clarity," he said, his voice measured and professional, "Mrs. Caldwell's contributions to this event were not rumors, and they were not social gestures invented for attention. They are documented payments made directly in response to requests from the immediate family." Vanessa gave a brittle laugh. "Arthur, this is a private family matter. It became public when Eleanor was publicly labeled." His answer was so calm that it left no place for her to hide. I saw several guests turn toward one another, their earlier amusement fading into discomfort. The woman in the silver shawl lowered her eyes. The man from Michael's office stared at his glass. People who had laughed at a distance were now discovering how ugly the joke looked up close. Vanessa's mother stood from the head table, smoothing her dress. "Surely this can wait until tomorrow," she said. "This is Grace's wedding." Grace wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and said, "No, Mom. I want to hear it." The room changed again. My granddaughter's voice was soft, but it carried. Vanessa looked at her daughter as if Grace had stepped out of the role assigned to her. "Honey, you are emotional. You do not understand." Grace looked at the card, then at me. "I understand enough." Michael finally moved. He came around the table slowly, stopping a few feet away from me. "Mom," he said, "I should have checked. I should have asked where you were sitting." "Yes," I said. That was all. I did not soften it for him. Some truths do not need decoration. He swallowed. "I am sorry. I had imagined those words from him for years. I thought they might warm something inside me. Instead, they arrived late and thin, like a letter delivered after the house had already been sold." "Michael," I said, "I believe you are sorry now. But I needed a son before people were watching." His face crumpled in a quiet way, and for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and absolute trust. I loved that boy. I still did. But loving someone does not mean letting them hand your dignity to someone else for safekeeping. Arthur turned slightly toward Vanessa. "There is another matter. Robert Caldwell included protections in the family trust to prevent Eleanor from being pressured, isolated, or humiliated in connection with financial support. Based on tonight, I will recommend a formal review of all recent transfers and any pending distributions connected to Michael and Vanessa." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. That silence told the room more than any confession could have. Pending distributions. That phrase found its mark. She knew exactly what it meant. The renovation money she had been hinting about for their house in Mount Pleasant. The private school assistance she assumed would continue for Grace's younger cousins. The investment account Michael had counted on borrowing against. None of it was guaranteed. Not anymore. Not after tonight. Michael looked at Arthur, startled. "Wait. Are you saying the trust can be frozen?" Arthur did not blink. "I am saying Eleanor has rights your father made sure she would have." Those words almost undid me. Robert had protected me even from a future I refused to imagine. I had mistaken his caution for worry. Now I understood it was love written in legal language. Vanessa suddenly stepped toward Grace. "This is what she does," she said, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "She makes everything about money and control." Grace stood up fully then, still in her wedding dress, still holding her husband's hand. "Grandma paid because you asked her to," she said. "And you put that on her card?" Vanessa looked around, searching for help that did not come. Her friends looked away. Her mother sat down. Michael said nothing. Grace's voice broke. "How could you do that to her?" That question seemed to strip the last polish from Vanessa's face. She whispered, "I was trying to keep boundaries." I almost laughed, but I did not. "A boundary protects a person," I said. "It does not erase one." The words settled over the ballroom. Then I reached into my purse and took out the cream envelope I had brought for Grace. Vanessa's eyes followed it immediately, quick and hungry even now. I saw that, and so did Grace. I walked to my granddaughter and placed the envelope in her hands. "This is for you and your husband," I said. "Only for you. Not to reimburse anyone. Not to cover anyone's plans. Use it for your first home, your honeymoon, or a quiet Sunday when you need groceries and peace." Grace began crying again and wrapped her arms around me. I held her carefully, feeling the lace of her gown beneath my palms, remembering the baby blanket I had once tucked around her shoulders. "I am sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "I did not know." "I know," I said. "But now you do." "When?" I stepped back. I looked at Michael and Vanessa one last time. "After tonight, all requests for money go through Arthur. No calls. No guilt. No emergencies that somehow become my responsibility." Michael nodded, ashamed. Vanessa stared at the floor. For the first time all evening, I was no longer the woman at the far table. I was the one drawing the line. I left the microphone on the head table beside the card. It made a soft sound against the wood, barely noticeable, but to me it felt like the closing of a door I should have closed years earlier. No one applauded. No one needed to. The room was too full of truth for polite noise. Grace stood beside her husband, holding the envelope against her heart, her eyes still wet, but clearer now. Michael looked at me as if he wanted to cross the few feet between us and somehow undo 5 years of silence with one embrace. Vanessa stayed where she was, perfectly dressed, perfectly still, with nothing left to control. I did not wait for cake. I did not wait for the bouquet toss or the polite recovery people make after something uncomfortable has been dragged into the light. I picked up my purse, smoothed the front of my champagne dress, and walked toward the ballroom doors. This time, people did not look away. Some lowered their eyes. Some watched me with pity, a few with respect. I accepted none of it as payment. Respect that arrives only after public proof is not the kind a woman should have to live on. Arthur joined me in the lobby without a word. The music behind us started again, softer than before, uncertain and careful. Outside the hotel, the night air smelled like salt water and jasmine from the planters near the valet stand. Charleston Harbor shimmered across the street, black and silver beneath the moon. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling the cool air settle against my face. For the first time all evening, I could hear my own thoughts without Vanessa's voice crowding them. Arthur handed me a clean white envelope. Inside were the copies of the trust summary he always carried when family matters might arise. Robert would have laughed at that. Arthur was the only man I knew who treated paperwork like an umbrella, unnecessary most days, priceless when the weather turned. You did well, Arthur said. I looked back at the glowing hotel windows. I did not want to do it there. I know. Grace will remember this night differently now. She will remember who told her the truth. That was kind, but kindness did not erase the ache. A wedding should give a young woman memories of music, flowers, and the first dance. Not a grandmother standing with a microphone and a place card full of shame. Still, I knew the blame for that did not belong to me. Decent people stay quiet too long because they do not want to ruin beautiful moments. Manipulative people depend on that. I had finally stopped cooperating. The valet brought my car around, and just as I reached for the door, I heard Michael behind me. Mom. His voice cracked on the word. I closed my eyes briefly, then turned. He stood alone under the entrance lights. Vanessa had not followed him. That mattered, but not enough. Please do not leave like this, he said. I already left, Michael, I answered. You just noticed. He flinched. I am sorry. I should have done more. Yes. The word was not cruel. It was simply true. I did not know how bad it had gotten. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The gray at his temples. The expensive suit. The frightened boy still hiding behind a grown man's excuses. You knew enough to ask me not to make a scene. You knew enough to see I was alone. You knew enough to choose comfort. He covered his mouth with one hand, and for a moment I thought he might cry. I would have comforted him once. That night, I let him stand with the feeling. Can I come by tomorrow? He asked. No, I said softly. Tomorrow I am meeting Arthur. His eyes moved to the envelope in my hand. About the trust? About my life. That answer seemed to reach him more deeply than any legal threat. I opened the car door, then paused. Michael, I love you, but I will not keep proving it by letting you forget how to love me back. I got into the car before he could answer. As we pulled away from the hotel, I saw him in the side mirror, standing beneath the warm entrance lights like a man watching a ship leave the dock after ignoring every warning bell. At home, I placed the envelope on my kitchen table beside Robert's photograph. Then I took out the card, the one I had removed from my dress, and set it face up under the lamp. Paid guest. The words no longer hurt the same way. They looked smaller now. Cheap. Careless. Temporary. I opened my laptop and created a folder with the photographs, messages, invoices, and notes from the evening. Evidence, yes, but also a boundary. The next morning, I called Arthur before 9 o'clock. Not to ask what I had lost. Not to beg my family to see me. I called to decide what they would never touch again.